MTV has officially shut down the last of its music channels as of midnight on December 31st, 2025. Welcome to FeedbackDef. I'm Saby Reyes-Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist. Thanks for joining me. Now, if you live in the US, the MTV news doesn't exactly land with an earth-shattering impact as, the closing of a chapter or the end of an era or anything that dramatic, because MTV hasn't been active here as a music video platform for decades. But in Europe, MTV still had several 24-hour video channels like MTV Music, MTV 80s, MTV 90s, Club MTV, etc. Well, those are gone now, as MTV has shut down its video broadcasting in the UK, Ireland, France, Germany, Austria, Poland, and Hungary, as well as Brazil and Australia, according to reports in outlets like Deadline and Rolling Stone. Fittingly enough, those networks signed off with a symbolic gesture by airing the first video MTV ever aired here in the States. And that would of course be Video Killed the Radio Star by the Buggles. MTV famously launched with that video just after midnight on August 1st, 1981, which has, for obvious reasons, always been regarded in hindsight as this seismic watershed event, because it was. The momentum took a little bit to get going, about a year or two, but once it did, MTV became a juggernaut that completely redefined the way we not only consumed music, but understood it. Like, our whole relationship with music changed. And I would argue that this was as much of a paradigm shift as streaming would eventually bring about 25 years later in the mid-2000s. I mean, if you think about it, you don't really get YouTube the way we know it today as a primary propagator of music content, with music videos going viral and racking up hundreds of thousands or millions of views. You don't get that without MTV having laid the groundwork in our collective psyche. The fact that we even hold videos in our mind's eye to the degree that we still do is a result of MTV, period. Now, interestingly enough, music videos did exist in the 60s and 70s, but they were obviously made with a different purpose in mind, one that I've never quite fully understood, because they weren't made with the intention of being mass consumed by the public, or even seen by the public at all. But in an interesting twist, the reason I'm a big fan of the band Aerosmith, for example, is because I happened to see the videos that band made as holdovers from the time when only record industry people saw them. Why did I see them? Well, because MTV and cable TV in general didn't initially come to the Bronx where I grew up. I did see these iconic videos like Hot for Teacher by Van Halen, Material Girl, and Like a Virgin by Madonna, Wrapped Around Your Finger by The Police, etc., Dire Straits, all that stuff. But I saw those at the Manhattan apartment of a friend of mine from school. At home, I was accessing videos on a little-known UHF band channel named U68, which would broadcast these half-hour blocks of hard rock videos that had been pre-recorded. So every time you tuned in and saw a video, you'd know which block you were in just from the video you were watching, and you'd know what was coming next. This was not the upscale operation that MTV had become by the time I discovered U68 in like 84, 85. U68 was a ratty operation. I don't even remember if there were actual hosts. I don't think there were. And there's a Facebook group you can check out and find out or ask or check out, people's memories of watching that channel who grew up in the New York City tri-state area. The videos they would show were mostly the industry equivalent of the bargain bin. I mean, the Aerosmith videos for the songs Chiquita and Lightning Strikes, which were my introduction to that band, were the bottom barrel dregs of the video ecosystem. Let the Music Do the Talking was a new video at the time, and it was being pushed for MTV Play. But the other two songs, totally they were almost like fossils, culturally speaking and industry-wise. But that was from the point of view of the record companies and the tastemakers, not my point of view. As a 12-year-old watching on the tiny color TV in my bedroom at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, this was opening up a whole new world for me. I mean, I got to see some pretty obscure stuff that I just wouldn't have discovered had the bigger monoculture hose of MTV been piped in to where I was living. And yeah, U68 did show videos that would have also aired on MTV or were intended for that platform, like Let the Music Do the Talking or like Lick It Up by Kiss. And I think they showed some of the bigger ones too, like the bigger hits. But it's telling that I don't remember if they did. What I remember is the stuff that was way more off the beaten path. Like they would show a couple of videos of live AC/DC footage that was not widely circulated as far as I know, and live clips of guitarists like Michael Schenker and Gary Moore, who were famous, but who definitely weren't going to get in the door at MTV at that point. And metal acts like Grim Reaper, who I didn't like, but the scrappiness of U68 was its charm. You could say if MTV had the foothold of like a Saturday Night Live, U68 was the equivalent of the show Fridays instead, only way scrappier, way more low budget. So I didn't grow up with MTV. In fact, the first time I even had it in a home I lived in was in my early 20s. So it never managed to get the same grip on me that it did on this much broader scale. I was kind of not exactly indifferent to it, but it was like living near a really wide river that you can't see from your house, but you can tell is there, even when you don't see it out your window. Interestingly enough, though, I did have HBO growing up, which I'm almost positive also showed music videos, but not as much. They were more like occasional interludes between the long-form programming they aired, which was mostly movies, and you can correct me if I'm wrong if you grew up with HBO also and you remember seeing videos on there, but I'm almost positive, like I saw the video for Subdivisions by the band Rush on HBO, but that was a couple of years after that video was even current. And I think I only saw it like once or twice, and I watched HBO a lot as a kid. Now, one thing I did see a lot of that also helped shape my whole musical outlook was live concert films that HBO would show quite regularly. I remember repeatedly watching a broadcast of The Who performing in Toronto in 1982 on what was then billed as their farewell. You know, what's great about being a preteen and having these first encounters with these legacy bands is that I wasn't aware of their history enough to be prejudicial or snobby about the fact that they were, in a lot of ways, past their prime. By 1984/85, bands like Aerosmith, Kiss, Rush, and certainly The Who were legacy bands already, and that was 40 years ago. But on the other hand, once I started to delve into the back catalogs of those bands, even though the mid-70s was only going back 10 years at that point, it felt to me like I was excavating ancient history. I mean, I was only 12, so going back 10 years was a big deal in terms of my perception of time and life. And so I felt like this archaeologist when I went back and burrowed my way into the rich mineral sediment of classic rock. It felt in my mind like a cultural bedrock that had somehow always been there. It felt primordial to me. And now, thinking about MTV and how much time has passed since then, and seeing the online commentary about MTV shuttering these music channels, I'm really struck. Even though if you think about it, we're basically talking about a zombie media platform, like an undead corporate property. That's precisely the kind of entity we can point to as an example of failing to make the transition into the digital age. I mean, it's perfectly fitting, actually, for this to happen in a somewhat underwhelming way as a kind of, really, if you think about it, a non-story that gets reported across a fragmented media landscape, but nevertheless still carries some weight and inspires this wave of nostalgia. I don't even have much of an attachment to Video Killed the Radio Star at all, and even I felt something in how poignant it was for that video to represent both the first and last breath by this network. And you know, there's something to be said for experiencing broadcasts in real time and in a sense of that something is slipping away from us. I watched these last moments of MTV via YouTube. Somebody had recorded the live broadcast and posted it, and I was still really moved. You know, I've written about this and thought about it quite a lot, but I would argue that so much of what we're seeking on platforms like YouTube and even Netflix is to find a way to get back to that place where we were all participating in these moments together as they were taking place as transmissions from this tower that we all felt connected to. At least it felt that way. And I know this is a very, very, very recurring topic online, but there is something clearly that we've gained from having all of this content on demand, but it has most definitely been a trade-off. I explore that idea at length, in fact, in my Substack essay titled, "Do We Really Need Pop Culture?" which is the piece of writing I've done that I'm the most proud of. If what I'm saying here resonates with you, I'd really urge you to check that essay out. I'll link to it in the notes. Other than that, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think? Please do weigh in the comments. I love getting other people's perspectives on this kind of thing. What has been your experience? I also have a whole second part to this train of thought, which I'm saving as a separate post, where I start off talking about the front man of the Buggles, Trevor Horn, the one who became iconic from Video Killed the Radio Star with those giant glasses, who also went on to become a very successful producer. And I also talk about one of the albums he produced. I'm talking about the self-titled debut by Seal, and the impact it had on my life, and looking back on it, and how it hits with where I am now. And I get into parenting and regrets and melancholy and my difficulties with providing and maintaining a home, all wrapped up in what I think makes that album so extraordinary. And you might even get to hear me do some singing too. So, if you like what I'm laying down, I'd ask you to subscribe to FeedbackDef on both Substack and YouTube. There is some overlap with what I post on each of those, but they're slightly different gears of my train of thought. And if you want to further support what I'm doing, my Cash App is @ or $FeedbackDef. Yes, because we're living in the OnlyFans era, I'm going to come right out and say that the best way to support my efforts is to just make a donation directly via Cash App. I look at it this way. When I've spent time with a podcast episode, it's like, for me, having a cup of coffee with the host. So I treat the experience that way. And if I feel nourished, like I've just been in good company, I like to donate about as much as I would have paid for going to a cafe. I like to keep all my content free, but I like the idea of all of us supporting the independent content creators whose work we enjoy, like a modest hand-to-mouth economy where we're all just tipping one another. So if you're so inclined, thank you. Either way, I appreciate you being here. For FeedbackDef, I'm Saby Reyes-Kulkarni, the apostate music journalist, signing off for now. Until next time, rock on with your bad self.
Hey! Chitcherums! Lick salon! All in our